Aggregate supply. Aggregate supply is the total supply of goods and services produced within an economy at a given point in time and at a certain price level. It is represented by the aggregate supply curve, which describes the relationship between price levels and the quantity of output.
There are three economic goals: price stability, lower unemployment, and high and sustained economic growth. One of the tools that allows us to understand how price level, unemployment, and real GDP are determined is aggregate supply. Aggregate supply shows the production of everything inside the entire country, unlike the market supply, which is the supply of one product.
A graphical representation of the short-run relation between real production and the price level holds all ceteris paribus aggregate supply determinants constant. The positive slope of the SRAS curve captures the direct relation between real production and the price level that exists in the short run.
Graphical representation of the long-run relation between real production and the price level also holds all ceteris paribus aggregate supply detriments constant. The vertical LRAS curve captures the independent relation between real production and the price level that exists in the long run.
Determinants are held constant when the AS curves are constructed. A change in any of these determinants causes a shift of either the short run, long run, or both curves. Aggregate supply determinants fall into three categories: resource quantity, resource quality, and resource price.
Resource quality includes the amount of labor, land, entrepreneurship, and most importantly, capital stock available. Capital stock is the total quantity of capital used by the economy for production. It's a prime example of a resource quantity determinant that affects both short-run and long-run aggregate supply curves.
Resource quality is the productivity of the four factors of production. Technology falls under this category. Improvements in production techniques, often through product inventions and innovations, are an excellent example of a resource quality determinant. Technology causes shifts in both the short-run and long-run aggregate supply curves.
Resource price is the price of the inputs used in production. Falling under this category are wages, which equal the price of labor. Wages affect the short-run aggregate supply curve, but not the long-run aggregate supply curve. Energy prices equal prices of key energy inputs, for example petroleum, that are essential to any modern industrialized economy. Like wage, energy prices affect the short-run aggregate supply curve, but not the long-run aggregate supply curve.
There are three possible aggregate supply curve shapes, the first being horizontal. This is used when there are many unemployed resources and a constant price level, as in a recession or depression.
When it is positively sloped, resources are getting closer to full employment. There's upward pressure on prices. It is caused by rising cost of doing business, and sticky wages and/or sticky prices cause a curve to be positively sloped.
A vertical slope occurs when the real GDP is at level with unemployment at the full employment level. Any increase in demand at this full employment level will result only in an increase in price level. The economy is unable to produce any more goods and services for a long period of time.
Labor economics looks at the suppliers of labor workers, the demands of labor employers, and attempts to understand the resulting pattern of wages, employment, and income. The sticky wages theory of the upward sloping aggregate supply curve is based on the labor market.
In the sticky wages theory, the pay of employed workers tend to respond slowly to the changes in a company's performance. When unemployment rises, wages of workers that are employed tend to remain the same or grow at a slower rate than before, rather than falling with the decrease in demand for labor.
There are various theories of wages which have been put forward by different economists from time to time, but none of them are free from criticism. The most important theories are the subsistence theory, the wage fund theory, the residual claimant theory, the marginal productivity theory, and the modern theory of supply and demand.
Also known as the iron law of wages, the substance theory of wages states that the wage in the long run tends to be equal to the minimum level of substance. It's argued that if wages exceed the substance level, the labor will marry earlier and produce more children. This would result in an increased number of workers than are required by employers. In turn, money wages will fall to the level of subsistence. The wage fund theory explains that wages depend upon the proportion between population and capital. Essentially, we can say that wage fund is the amount of floating capital which is set apart by employers for paying wages to the laborer. The average wage rate is determined by dividing the wage fund by the total number of workers employed. The residual climate theory states that the wages of a working man are ultimately what he produces after the deduction of rent, taxes, and the interest on his capital. However, criticism towards this theory states that the theory ignores the influence of the supply side in the determination of wages.
The marginal productivity theory of wages is the determination of wage rate in conditions of perfect competition. Wages tend to be equal not to the marginal revenue product, but the discounted marginal net product of the labor employed at the margin. In economic theory, the law of supply and demand is considered one of the fundamental principles governing an economy. It is described as a state where as supply increases, the price will tend to increase, or vice versa. When supply and demand are in balance, the economy is said to be in equilibrium between price and equality.
To summarize, the short run is the period that begins immediately after an increase in price level and ends when input prices have increased the same proportion as the increased price level. A shift to the right or increase in supply results in decreased price level and increased quantity. A shift to the left or decrease in supply results in increased price level and decrease in quantity. In conclusion, the long run is the period when input prices have completely adjusted to changes in the price level of final goods. The long-run aggregate supply curve is perfectly vertical, which reflects economists' belief that changes in aggregate demand only cause a temporary change in an economy's total output.